Well, before we do that, can you tell me what the word games stand for here at Funcoland?
Funcoland. How many of us are old enough to remember a time when more than one place sold secondhand games? I worked at Funcoland when I was 16, and to show off the power of the PlayStation, we used the Resident Evil disc. The full motion video, the pseudo 3D, the voice acting!
Stop it! Don't open that door!
It had everything we needed to sell consoles. Now, imagine for a moment, 16-year-old me, saving up all his money to buy that gray cinder block with a copy of Resident Evil, marathoning the game while my mom was deployed, nearly shitting my pants when the dogs came crashing through the windows, running around the mansion trying to avoid wasting ammo while looking for the next door I'm supposed to go through. Yeah, there was something about this game. There was something visceral, something terrifying, that had 16-year-old me running from light switch to light switch in my house, peering around corners, afraid to leave my room just to go to the bathroom. Horror in video games seems to be about scarcity on the surface. Many people will point to the game that started the zeitgeist, Resident Evil, as proof, but I think that scarcity is skin deep. The real answer is one layer down, below the dermis, and lies primarily in the psyche. So, let's find out together what fears our minds manifest to give us the creepy crawlies in games.
Reservation deposit required. Cabins for rent in Nightfall. Oh, hell.
Near the end of a long run through a floor in golden light. You have 2 of the 3 keys that you need, but you've run into so many enemies this floor that you have the attention of the entire gut. How will you get to the other side of this level and get the last key with 2 broken weapons and a fistful of unidentified items? Now after sitting there, watching a stack of books patrol the room ahead of you, you decide, run for it. That feeling that you have just moments before you take off running, that tiniest drip of adrenaline, where does it come from? It's the fight or flight instinct, and it usually happens when the player is totally immersed in the game. The tonic for this magical effect is usually a slowly creeping stress. My supplies are dwindling, my weapons are broken, and both of my legs are crippled, and the entire base knows I'm here. And the last checkpoint was 20 minutes ago. Fear, in other words. But what happens when we experience fear? And how do game developers use our fight or flight response as mechanics in their games? Loss of progress, loss of time, and oddly enough, loss of confidence is attributed to a fear of loss. So, for example, golden light stacks systems that will cause the player to lose health, which in turn causes the player to make a difficult choice. Do I eat one of these unidentified items and hope for the best? Do I eat one of my weapons and hope I don't need it for a fight later? Or do I make a run for the elevator and hope for the best? None of these decisions is an easy one, because each has their own game-ending possibilities. This causes stress in the player, and in that moment, they're afraid. If someone says to you that Dark Souls is their favorite horror game, would you scoff at them when you know that this level exists? Dark Souls works because of the risk and reward. There's an interesting flow to the level design with branches that either reward or punish curiosity. The levels double back on themselves enough to instill doubt. Am I going the right way? Can I handle all these enemies? Or should I double back and bonfire so I can spend all the souls I've gathered? The adrenaline-fueled panic we feel when we're carrying a heavy load of souls and get taken off guard by an enemy coming close to losing everything? That kind of panic is nearly indistinguishable physiologically from fear. And in fact, a fear of something specific can cause a panic attack. Any game can benefit from a section that frightens the player out of their flow state. and stresses them out a little. Test their resolve and self-control. See how their reflexes fare when you're panicking to save your digital self. A lot of this is due to generous spacing between each checkpoint, creating a fear of loss at the idea of having to do it all over again, which should, in turn, change the way the player plays the game. The best way I can explain this is with an experiment. Install Thief and only save your game after a mission is complete. Do you find yourself playing more carefully than you would normally? How stressed out are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Did any of that translate into palpable fear? In movies, fear is derived from empathy. Empathy for the main character, mostly. The Invisible Man is a great example. The movie starts out with the main character escaping an abusive, controlling relationship with a psychopath, who continues to toy with the main character by making her believe that her trauma is making her believe things that aren't true. And it works because we, the audience, are the only people who know that she's telling the truth. The horror elements wouldn't be so terrifying if we weren't already able to empathize with her. In a movie like Friday the 13th, the characters are mostly fodder for a sort of bloody catharsis, and the only likable characters are usually the ones surviving until the end. With games, we aren't watching the main character, we are the main character. So there's very little mental distance between us and the things that are happening on the screen. By extension of the controller, it might as well be us dying. This fear is the main reason why Resident Evil was so scary to a 16-year-old me. I've never forgotten how it felt to play that game for the first time. The typewriter ribbons force you to plan ahead, while the limited inventory meant possibly leaving the ribbon behind whenever you found a lockbox, in favor of maybe taking more ammo. That scarcity, while intense feeling, is not the same as the fear that causes it. The fear that makes decision-making difficult. The fear of failure. In Resident Evil, you didn't just fail your digital self, your character was viciously eaten alive, or decapitated violently, or eaten and secreted out by a giant spider. Seeing your avatar killed so viciously makes the player feel a sense of guilt, like they not only failed themselves, but they failed the character that they swore to protect. It's no wonder they doubled down on the death scenes in Resident Evil 2 and kept the mechanic for all these years, even in the remakes. You tend to play more carefully when you're invested in the character's success. The fear of failure is the cause of most of the distress that a player feels when entering into a new dungeon in Darkest Dungeon. And while I don't agree with most of the disempowering designs the game leverages, the mechanics do combine together to create a slowly creeping panic in the player that their entire run might be destroyed by a series of unfortunate events. And as those events keep piling up, that stress, that fear of failing compounds itself. The third fear is a bit harder to explain, but is one of the most important. Sanitarium is a game of seeming nonsense that guards the truth behind metaphor. It's an adventure game that has you in a village full of deformed children, that has you win at a game of hide-and-seek by digging up the decaying body of a child, which is square-shaped, brain-damaged child carts around in a wagon so the dead girl doesn't miss any of the fun.
Well, I'm not supposed to talk about it, but since mine started changing us, weird things happen. First my face, and then Meg's legs kind of shriveled up.
What? What's wrong?
No, I can't. I hear Mother starting to wake up. If she hears me, I'll get put in the patch.
The abstractness of the world and its logic discuss the rational side of us. Why are we here? What does this have to do with my character? And how do we fix what's broken them? Questions that only time will answer. With Golden Light and Prey, the fear of the unknown is the mechanic of fear. The enemies are usually hidden from you. In Golden Light, the enemies disguise themselves as stacks of books, shelves, computer monitors, anything. And unlike in Prey, where if you saw any of two given objects in a room, you knew there was likely a mimic in there with you, the mimics in Golden Light share no such limitation. So an enemy could be anywhere. I am Shodan. This fear is the fear of the unknown. Take this series of events from I have no mouth and I must scream, for example.
And the yellow. Why is everything so damned yellow?
We're told time and time again that she has an irrational fear of yellow, a fear that she no longer remembers the cause of.
Oh no. I remember it was... Oh God, it hurts. It hurts. Yellow. There was a yellow... And it was closed in. I couldn't breathe and the pain. Get me out of here! Oh, another panic attack. I feel so ashamed.
She believes it to be rational, but it has a sinister source.
The elevator stopped at the 7th floor for a maintenance man. To your horror, he inserted his key into the control panel and locked the elevator.
I'm back, Ellen.
Once that source is revealed, we may experience empathy with that character, sadness, and a need to protect them. We may be rooting for her, wanting her to succeed and stop the cruel AI torturing her. That makes us invested, so any of the horrible things that happen to her feel like they're happening to us as well. Another way to invoke the fear of the unknown is to put the player in a foreign, hostile, bestial world, or beset on all sides by alien monstrosities. Resident Evil manages to do this, but benefits from the familiarity of zombies in exchange for something utterly foreign, like, say, the beasts of Bloodborne. Neuroplasticity allows our brains to create new connections. And when the fear is experienced, new connections are made to specific stimuli. So if you've ever seen a zombie movie, you know to fear them. When you're trapped in a labyrinthine mansion and forced to run past them time and time again, your stress builds, and therefore your fear, as the fight or flight response is constantly kicking in. Fog. It's used in many games like Alan Wake to create an atmosphere, to slightly obscure what's ahead, but mostly it's used for more cinematic aspirations. It creates mood. In Silent Hill, the fog obscured the enemies coming ahead of you. It was, according to some, created on accident as part of a concession due to limited hardware capabilities. But the real impact of Silent Hill's horror was the pure abstract nature of the creatures, the trembling, gyrating masses of meat shambling towards you with malicious intent. That was the backbone of the horror. Some of the monster designs bordered on metaphor, with the nurses being the easiest example. As I said in my monsters video, the sexuality of the nurses both arouse and disgust. It preys on the part of us attracted to iconography, and in a way, makes us feel like perverts for even having a thought. The other thing about fear of the unknown is that the fear seems to come from within us as well. Now say you're walking down a hallway in the house that you've lived in for 5 years now, and you see a picture frame sitting in a place that never held a picture frame before. It's of a family you don't recognize, but the child is torn out of the picture. You go into the living room to find your wife, but she's not there. And you go back to the place where the picture frame was, and it's no longer there either. Did I imagine all that? Was there ever a picture frame or a wife? Am I imagining all this? If the player's made familiar with something, but that something keeps changing, it creates doubt in the player. Say this happened to you when trying to open a door. Then say roaches come pouring out of the door as it slowly opens on its own. The unknown element is playing double duty here. Was it really a child in there? And is that woman in there with it? The thing that made PT Silent Hill such a great experience was that curiosity was the main mechanic. You needed to figure out these unconventional puzzles in order to succeed, which forced you into situations you didn't want to be in. Like, for example, looking through this hole, or staring out this window, or looking behind you. It's a shame what happened to PT, the evil that was done to it. But hey, there's an emulator for the game now that some brave soul has taken upon themselves to, what I think, is recreating every step in the game through the Unreal Engine. So if you're interested in one of the best horror experiences of all time, go check it out, since it's literally abandonware. There's a very important element that cannot be forgotten, and that element of fear helps us signify the unknown, and identify it, even before we see it.
I'm talking to all the fine, upstanding folks got their welfare cut, got their jobs pulled out from under us.
I was playing an early access build of Golden Light and something clicked. My brain screamed out, "Be careful. This floor's serious." Rooms full of gold, things that could be mimics, that gives me this halting, starting, stopping cadence to movement like someone driving a stick shift for the first time. Startled by a radiator, reminded me to slow down. Okay, found the key. Time to head back. My hopes for an easy run at this floor are dashed by two bad news bears entering the room I need to explore. It's the breathing. Listen for the breathing. Thief is a game that many have tried to mimic in terms of atmosphere and gameplay design. Sound, however, just like calculating diffuse light, is a complicated process, and our ears are so highly tuned to identify sounds that any deviation from simulating it completely is noticed by the brain. If the sound reproduction isn't convincing, it ends up being discarded by the player as background noise. When the player tries to find the mimic in Golden Light, they're confronted by disorientation because of the sheer number of props spread about in various rooms. It's near impossible to spot the mimic, which gives the player pause, but often breaks immersion. Simulating how sound bounces off an object is a monumental task, but let's look at this as nothing more than a what-if exercise. Sounds from a survival aspect are a lot like images. Our brain takes in the auditory stimuli, and a decision is made based on past experiences. We probably know what a lion sounds like or a baboon, but what if the sound we're hearing is new? Now we're confronted with a choice. Investigate or back away. There can be an animal through that thicket, something I could eat, or something that could eat me. The same type of trepidation is felt when entering a new room in Golden Light, except lessened because for all we know, the sound could be coming from anywhere. Hell, that breathing could be a friendly NPC soda machine. But if each NPC or enemy type had a different tell, then we would much more closely identify who the mimic is. And we'd still be stressed out when confronted with two props of the same type. Now, I don't want to superimpose my designs on someone else's game, and for all I know, Mr. Pink is probably working on something like this already. It's still early days, but I'm trying to impress upon you, my dear viewer, the importance of sound in horror. Not just in identifying the source of a sound, but in setting your player's teeth on edge. Amping up that adrenaline and stress to the point where they have to stop playing for a while, just to get their bearings. In essence, sound foreshadows what is coming, and starts the fear process early, obscuring the threat in the next room, while informing the player properly of the dangers ahead. It's the ticking bomb theory. We know the bomb is under the table, but the people sitting at the table have no idea. Tension, stress, and horror all in one package.
Daddy, help me.
Weakness is probably the most important aspect of a horror game. It's a tool that's been used by horror games since the beginning. Even text adventures could be scary at times when faced with a decision that you know could kill you instantly. In more recent designs, this is usually a tweaking of numbers that ensures the player is always statistically outnumbered, either by the size of the encounter, number of enemies, or the strength of the enemies between you and the checkpoint. Now this can work, but if we're talking an action game like Devil May Cry, well, it's tough to feel scared when the character you're playing is this guy. The original Resident Evil made the encounter scary due to the control schemes and ammo scarcity. Combined with tank controls, an enemy that could turn and grab you, and combat that required visual calculus to aim, Resident Evil was successful at making first-time players approach each situation with the urgency it deserved. But in a recent interview, the designer of Resident Evil, Shinji Mikami, said that he was embarrassed when people would bring up the camera or the tank controls and tell him that the game was scarier because of those elements. Shinji Mikami said he knew that they could make a scary game without making it control like an RC car. I agree with this sentiment. Designing weakness to evoke fear can be difficult, since players are usually quick to pick up on exploits which make the combat less engaging and panic-inducing. Giving the players a control scheme that is so foreign to them that it's akin to learning a new language is a surefire way to evoke fear, but that only grows resentment in the player, feeling that if they just had a control scheme that made sense, none of this would have happened. Resident Evil 2 The Remake shows how a control scheme for an action game can also be used to evoke fear, and that it's much less about disempowering the player mechanically, but more about snap-second decisions that create cascading effects that in turn lead to tension, stress, and fear. There's two mechanics I want to talk about specifically, the 180 turn and the weapon aiming. What both of these things have in common is time, which is a valuable resource in a real-time encounter. With snap turn, it gives you a way to run away faster from an encounter, but it forces you to put your back to a potentially dangerous enemy. While aiming trades in time for more accuracy, but each successful headshot slows down the enemy, and the right answer is going to be different for each encounter. This makes the player rely on their decision making in the moment to determine the right answer, which in turn creates stress when one decision causes another unintended problem. Now take this for example. You open a door, and as it opens, you see a zombie turn the corner and come lumbering at you. There's a split second to decide. Do you raise your gun, take aim for the head, and fire a shot? Or do you spin around and double back to put some space between you and the zombie coming after you? But what if you only opened that door because you were running away from another zombie? What if you were running from that zombie because you were out of ammo? What do you do now? You run. In this moment, you have panicked the player, and they're running for their lives, experiencing a real fear. And you can do this through all the elements I've listed for you. The length and complexity of an area, and distance between supplies with carefully placed encounters that test the player's concentration under stress will ensure that by the end of the journey, they're injured and low on ammo. In other words, desperate. The real test of a player's nerve is near the end, when they've almost reached the next checkpoint. But they're out of supplies, out of health, there's only one room between them and their objective. That's when you have them in the grip of fear. And that's when the player makes mistakes. I'll leave you with a story from a game that I don't typically associate with horror, but is, at short intervals, a terrifying game. Minecraft, with its cartoony graphics and kid-friendly skin, hides a bit of horror inside it. I remember the first time I traveled down into a cave system on survival mode, fighting zombies and skeletons, dodging creepers the whole way, trying to find resources and survive with all my gear intact. Then I fell down into a hole while traveling down a dark passageway and nearly died. In the darkness, I could hear the ambient sounds of monsters that seemed to be coming from all around me. Footsteps and a single light from a lava flow far off in the distance past the shifting shadows. I felt that fear again. But it was all of my fears combined. Fear of loss, fear of failure, and fear of the unknown. I was surrounded by who knows what with an inventory full of materials I needed and couldn't afford to lose. And I had no health. And worst of all, I had no idea where I was. The mechanic of horror is hopelessness, overwhelming odds, confronting extinction, the feeling of being trapped or stranded, the insight of realizing that you are the only sane person in an insane world, and the elation when, against all odds, you survive the ordeal and find hope in that hopelessness. That's what makes horror games so scary and yet so enjoyable.